morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aydın Eroğlu, and I would like to take you on a tour of Istanbul. And would like to start here in Yarımburgaz with the caves. Probably those of you who have been to Istanbul before either have never come here, or people do not start their tour of Istanbul at Yarımburgaz caves. However, I chose to do so because this is where the history of Istanbul began. I have to take you back to 400,000 years before our times. The very early men leaving Ethiopia in eastern Africa has walked overland through Saudi Arabia and Turkish Peninsula today and has arrived at this very point. And according to the DNA tested findings, which are now on display in Istanbul's Archaeological Museum, the findings from this very cave date back to 400,000 years before our times. I realize very well that this is the beginning of the European civilization. I would like to invite you inside this very cave, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we are inside the Yarımburgaz caves. Behind me you can see the top cave, and where we are is the bottom cave. These in fact go back to different times. And to my right there is the extension of this cave, the lower cave, which goes inside for almost a mile. And because of insufficient lighting, I'm going to express to you the importance of the cave right here and what went on in this cave before we exit the Yarımburgaz caves. Now, in this section where they have done many excavations, they have realized that there has been 5 different layers of Yarımburgaz caves. And this usually goes back to the last 7,500 years of life in this cave. Because of the sea level rising, the people who stayed here were hunters as well as fishermen. So when the sea level rose up and formed a small lake at the top, around which, during the excavations, they found out a lot of earthen vessels, pottery, which is made from clay, baked, and decorated with red colors, very similar to the Hittite work. Around which they have also found some blades made of pebble stones and some axes made of flint stones. So all of this bring us in the 5 layers till the Hellenistic period, when the top cave was used like a temple, and into the Roman and Christian periods, they used the top cave as a church. And also burial areas have been discovered. Thanks to the great works of the Canadian McGill University beginning in 1989, we have uncovered the opening of the European civilization on the European shores of Istanbul, approximately 20 minutes to the European airport of Istanbul, the Atatürk Airport. Reporting live from Istanbul on the 29th of October 2009. The year 86 years ago, Turkish Republic was founded, and into the year 2010, when we hope to be the European capital of culture. This is where the European culture started, and I'm so happy to host you in my town where history began. So, ladies and gentlemen, our second stop today is in the Aksaray district of Istanbul. We're at Yeni Kapı, the new Marmaray, Gebze, Halkalı train system will be stationed right here. During the excavation of this station, back in 2004, they realized this was part of the old Theodosius harbor of Constantinople. Since the last 5 years, there has been the most extensive excavations in this 30,000 square meter area, and as you may notice it from a distance, they have gone down some 10 feet already from the level, and they need to go down another 10 feet. But in the meantime, they found out some 19 big ships intact, which will be on display very soon in one of the museums of Istanbul, and probably some of them will be on exhibit right here at this future train station. The largest of the ships is about 65 feet long, divided into two, wrecked by a tsunami that must have taken place in the 11th century. They have discovered many amphoras and different ships intact, along with skeletons, and especially one that belonged to a child who must have lived here some 8,500 years ago. We are witnessing the Neolithic portion of Istanbul, long before Byzantium, long before Constantinople, and long before Istanbul today. One of your future visits, I'm sure, will include this interesting excavation site, which has been going on 7 days a week, 24 hours, under floodlights, under the coordination of 40 archaeologists and 200 men trying to dig this interesting harbor of Theodosius. Reporting from Istanbul on this 86th anniversary of Turkish Republic. One of the best ways to arrive in Istanbul is by a cruise ship, which will introduce you the wonderful skyline of the only bi-continental city in the world. Istanbul, Turkey, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada, and San Francisco of the US of A are usually referred to as the top 4 cities in the world, which are regarded most scenic by those cruise passengers. However, Istanbul's historical background surpasses the others by some 400,000 years. While trying to cope with this historical baggage, the natives of Istanbul today are busy trying to complete a massive facelift to numerous historical edifices, and this is incredibly expensive, by the way, so that the future visitors will remember the year 2010, when Istanbul will be the cultural capital of Europe. 2,000 local ferries every day zigzag between the two continents, over Asia where the sun rises, and over Europe where she sets, along with 137 ocean-going liners passing through the Bosphorus, including cargo ships, oil tankers, and cruise ships, along with navy boats. Daily constitutes Bosphorus the busiest strait in the world, approximately 3 times as busy as the Panama Canal. Despite the damaging tools of time and history, Istanbul served as the capital city of 3 world empires: the Byzantine, the Roman, and the Ottoman. where her natives enjoyed religious tolerance amongst the three Abrahamic faiths. 675 BC, foundation of Chalcedon, the Asiatic city of the blind people. 658 BC, foundation of Byzantium by Byzas over the Seraglio Peninsula, first of the 7 European hills. 330 AD, foundation of Constantinople by Constantine the Great, a new Christian capital. 392 AD, Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire. 395 AD, Roman Empire was split into two by Theodosius between his two sons, Arcadius and Honorius, and Constantinople became the capital of the Roman Empire. 476 AD, Rome was captured by Odoacer, and Constantinople remained as the sole capital of the Romans for almost 1,000 years. 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II conquered the city and changed her name to Istanbul, and she then became the Ottoman capital city until the end of the Ottoman state in 1923. When Atatürk declared the new Turkish state, Ankara was then announced as the new capital of our republic. The Hippodrome of Constantinople was the center of attraction, meaning a square for horse riding. It was built in the 2nd century AD by the earlier Roman Emperor Septimus Severus and was enlarged by Constantine the Great in the 4th century AD. When the city was inaugurated on the 11th of May 330 AD, the size of the new hippodrome was 480 meters long by 150 meters and could hold 50,000 people. Shaped like a U structure for chariot and horse races, they were also holding acrobatic shows as well as wild animal fights. In this hippodrome, the famous riot Nike took place in 532 AD, which is when, in one afternoon, some 30,000 people were killed. The activities continued during the days of the Ottoman Empire, but in time, it became an interesting exhibition area with the following edifices. At the northern end of the hippodrome today lies the German fountain, built and completed in the year 1899, and was inaugurated when Kaiser Wilhelm II visited Istanbul. His birthday was on the 27th of January 1901, when he came for the inaugural ceremony with 8 medallions inside, forming monograms of both the Kaiser of Germany and the Ottoman Sultan Abdülhamid II. This is German gold mosaics with beautiful marble from Germany at the top end of today's hippodrome. And next we move on to the Theodosius obelisk, which is 25 meters high and weighs 200 tons. It's made of pink granite and it was mined in Aswan in southern Egypt. Thutmose III was the pharaoh in the 15th century before Christ, and this was standing during his reign in front of the Karnak temple in Luxor, Egypt. It was brought here during the reign of Theodosius, the emperor of Constantinople, in 390 AD, and the governor at the time was Proclus, with the help of hundreds of slaves with beautiful marble baths It was erected on top of this beautiful base in 32 days. Over this obelisk base, we can see the family of Theodosius, his wife and two sons, Archelaus and Honorius, and the high officials are watching the games as a state propaganda. Along the hippodrome, in between the two obelisks, lies the Serpentine Column, which represents the Greek victory over the Persians in the Battle of Plataea dating back to 479 BC. They had melted all the bronze weapons of minor destruction in a pot, as then they built these three winding snakes holding the pot at the top. The three snake heads have been lost. In our times, only one upper jaw still remains in the Archaeological Museum of Istanbul. This was brought here from the Temple of Apollo in Delphi in the 4th century AD as a decoration to the hippodrome. At the southern end of the hippodrome, where my University of Tourism and Economics today stands, right in front of it is the famous walled obelisk, an imitation obelisk which rises some 32 meters in height, and it was covered with bronze shields which were taken away by the Fourth Crusades in the 13th century and were minted into coins in Venice. Some people think this dates back to the 10th century AD. However, we have proof that both obelisks were here in the 4th century AD as well. One of the other edifices alongside of the Hippodrome of Constantinople is the Turkish Islamic Arts Museum, which was built in the 16th century and at the time of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent was given to Ibrahim Pasha, his Grand Vizier and his son-in-law, as a gift of the wedding. At the upper floor of the museum, we have a section for Turkish carpets, especially carpets from the Selçuk era, as well as the 16th century Uşaks, the Holbein, the Bellini, the keyhole design are some of those most fantastic designs one can see as an incredible display of old Turkish carpets. On the ground floor is the ethnographical section. Let us zoom in to some of these special carpets on display at the second floor, starting with a special keyhole prayer rug from Konya of the 17th century, followed by a pelt motif Konya of the 17th century. Then comes Konya Ladik, an 18th century prayer rug from the mausoleum of Alaaddin Keykubad in Konya, and Uşak of the 18th century as a prayer rug, where you can see on the white base the footprints, and Uşak of the 17th century, multicolors, followed by a Central Anatolian 17th century double star design, a 17th century Transylvanian carpet, reminding us of its better examples in Brașov, Romania, 17th century Konya prayer carpet with the design of Kaaba, the holy house in Mecca, a Konya 17th century medallions in wonderful condition, a 17th century Bergama Holbein with 2 hexagonal medallions, a Holbein of the 16th century with 6 hexagons and 2 large hexagons, a beautiful Lotto of the 16th century Uşak, followed by the 1221 with Kufic borderline from Konya, from the mosque of Alaaddin Keykubat, with beautiful red and blue colors, the white base multicolored hexagon 1221 Alaaddin Keykubat mausoleum carpet, followed by a 16th century double medallion Karapınar from Konya, a 16th century Chintamani double medallion Uşak, a 16th century Uşak with white base and the double birds design. Several of these runners showing each segment as a prayer carpet for the family, 16th century Uşak. From northwestern Iran, garden carpets as we call them, of the 18th and 19th centuries. This garden design represents the Garden of Eve in paradise. From the Caucasus comes the Azerbaijani carpet of the 18th century, and finally a small fragment from the mausoleum of Alaaddin Keykubat, dated 1221 in Konya. A very small piece remaining as a result of these 18 pieces saved in our times because of the wonderful notification of the German ambassador to Konya in 1905. Alongside the hippodrome lies the famous Mosque of Istanbul, known as the Blue Mosque, but in fact the locals call it the Mosque of Sultan Ahmet, built by the same name, Sultan, in between the years of 1609 and 1616. The architect was Mehmet Ağa, who was one of the students of the famous master architect Sinan. Before we enter into the mosque, we run into a portico with 26 granite columns carrying 30 domes, with an ablution fountain in the center with 6 columns. One can easily notice from the outside the 6 minarets and the 16 balconies, and the dome which runs up to 43 meters high. When you enter into the Blue Mosque, one can beautifully notice the 21,043 Iznik and Kütahya tiles, with 260 windows. A place in the front we have the direction towards Mecca called Mihrab, where the Imam stands and his congregation behind him, all facing to Mecca, which is some 17 degrees southeast of Istanbul. To the right of this Mihrab, the prayers niche, we have the Friday's pulpit, as well as the chanter's pulpit, and the special section for the imperial family members to the left of the prayers niche. The balcony is reserved for the ladies, as the men and the ladies do pray separately. Right behind the Blue Mosque, underneath the foundations of the Blue Mosque, we have the old mosaic museum known as the Great Palace, dating back to the days of Constantine the Great. Some excavations have led us to the findings in beautiful mosaic of a Medusa, a lion hunt, acanthus leaves, the slave pulling the camel with two riders are some of those fantastic scenes one can notice underground. The Basilica Cistern was built in the 6th century AD at the time of Justinian and was completed by 532 AD. In 1987, we had some restoration done to this old and largest underground cistern of Constantinople that covers 9,800 square meters, 150 meters long and 65 meters wide, with a capacity of 100,000 tons of water, and water level is kept in our times at 1.5 meters high. We do have a boardwalk, so we can actually walk around this beautiful underground cistern, which has 336 columns in 12 rows. The height of the columns are 9 meters, and caps are usually Ionian, Corinthian, and Doric as well. The famous teardrop column and the two Medusa heads must definitely be seen while making this walk around the underground cistern. The Hagia Sophia Museum was the biggest Byzantine church built in Constantinople, 3 times over the same premises. The first 2 were ruined by the rioters, and the last one was commissioned by Justinian and was completed in 5 years, 10 months in 537 AD. It was converted into a mosque in 1453, and thanks to the religious tolerance of Islam, all the mosaics and frescoes were covered with plaster upon the conversion of the church. The dome was solidified by Sinan in the 16th century because the second church was a lot smaller, and Justinian wanted the largest church ever built anywhere in order to surpass the great Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. This is why some 30 years after the dome collapsed during an earthquake and had to be rebuilt several times until the days of Sinan. But once Sinan had built the buttresses we have today from the outside pushing the dome to the center, the building has been safe ever since. In our times it's been going under some restoration in the last 11 years. Church of St. Sophia was used as a church for 916 years and the following 482 years as a mosque, and was converted into a museum in 1935. At the entrance to the church, we can see from the second half of the 9th century AD the mosaic of Emperor Leo VI begging in front of Jesus Christ, who is seated on the heavenly throne, and on both sides we can read, "I am the light of this world." Above this, we see mosaics along this inner aisle of the church, mosaics which are originals from the 6th century AD, because they do not have any human representations. Let us not forget, St. Sophia, as well as other churches of Constantinople, had a very destructive period known as the Iconoclastic Age in between 726 and 843 AD. During that time, the people of Constantinople were destroyers of human representations as well as the cross pieces. So all these mosaics with figures on are from the second half of the 9th century AD and until the 12th century AD. Once we enter into the church, in the front of the church, in the apse, we can see Virgin Mary with Jesus Christ and with two angels on both sides. Down below you can see some Arabic script, and these large Arabic scripts of Allah is on the right with Mohammed on the left is just a lovely example that Istanbul is the city of many contrasts. At the bottom of this we have the prayers niche pointing to Mecca, which was added when it became a mosque, as well as the Friday's pulpit to the right. So we are actually visiting a museum combining the characteristics of a church and a mosque all in one. Other than the beautiful mosaic of Virgin Mary with Jesus Christ, before we leave the building, there is another very major mosaic with Virgin Mary, Jesus Christ in the center, as well as Justinian to the left, Constantine the Great to the right. Constantine presenting a model of the city that he had founded, while Justinian presenting a model of the church that he founded. And it does not have the minarets we see today, because that is how it looked when it was a church. This mosaic is especially very interesting because being built in the 10th century AD, you may find it ironic that we see the first examples of Renaissance appearing on this mosaic. If you look at the faces of the two emperors on both sides, both Justinian and Constantine, they are both half turned to the center because they're looking at Virgin Mary with Jesus Christ as infant. By looking towards the center has given them a face with unequal cheeks. The nose is closer to one side and it's not in the center. So this is where the third dimension of Renaissance first begins. Some 400 years earlier to the Italian Renaissance, which you can see in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, in the second gallery where you have paintings of Giotto going back to 1320s is when Italian Renaissance had started. This 400 years difference between Byzantine Renaissance and Italian Renaissance is an interesting feature in the year 2010, when European culture went from Yarımburgaz. Renaissance also went from Saint Sophia to Italy in the second half of the 15th century when Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Turks. So the artists of this beautiful art of mosaics also left town, and Italy became famous with Renaissance once those artists moved to Italy. The Palace of Topkapi is the second palace built by the Ottoman dynasty here in Istanbul at the time of Sultan Mehmet, the conqueror of Constantinople, in between the years of 1460 and 1478. A palace which kept on growing larger with the new additions until 1856. The entrance to the palace is through the cannon gate, so called because of the two cannons on both sides in order to guard this palace was placed. It has a very typical style of a tower-like structure with the addition of a tent at the top. Of course, the background of the Turkish people is coming from the Asian continent, and they were nomads. So this design of a tent, when they settled in a major city like Istanbul, and it formed a triangulated shape, which is the tower-like structure we see today. The two towers on both sides welcomes you with the monogram and the seal of the Sultan who founded the palace. And for the next 391 years, the Ottoman sultans, all 25 of them, have lived in this palace. From this palace, they moved on to another one along the Bosphorus, which is called the Dolmabahce Palace. In the second half of the 19th century, the palace grounds covers an area of 700,000 square meters, with some 20 exhibition halls and some 86,000 artifacts. It is one of the richest museums in the world. The palace is formed around 4 different courtyards, and this is where the difference appears between an Oriental palace and a European palace, because in the Oriental palaces we have courtyards with buildings around it, surrounding the courtyards, and there is no symmetry on the right side versus the left side of an Oriental palace, whereas in the European palaces, everything is under one single roof, and if there is a left aisle extending out of the single roofed building, there will be always a symmetric right aisle coming out in parallel, forming the uniformity in the European palaces, like the ones in the Buckingham Palace, the Versailles, the Louvre, the Schönbrunn in Vienna, or the Pitti Palace in Florence. When you walk into the grounds of Topkapi Palace, into the second courtyard, you notice some 20 chimneys on the right side, and that is the old kitchens of Topkapi Palace, where some 1,108 cooks worked, feeding the 5,000 residents who lived in the palace. Of course, the palace is where the Sultan's family lived, along with the guards, the janissaries, the paid soldiers of the Sultans, and the harem section, where the ladies of the Sultan lived, would be to the left-hand side, where you see the beautiful Justice Tower, rising to 45 meters in height, has a commanding view of the Asian and the European continents. It's interesting that this tower is called the Justice Tower, where Sultan would give away justice. Justice, what the world needs in our times, was very important because of the commandments of the Muslim faith upon the Ottoman dynasty. Going through the Gate of Felicity, it will take us into the third courtyard, and on the right side at that time you have, with 2 domes, the 4 rooms of Treasury Department, where some of the richest jewelry collection in the world is on exhibit, including the Topkapi dagger from the motion picture Topkapi of 1964, as well as several beautiful emeralds, thrones of the sultans, are all on exhibit overlooking the Bosphorus. To the left side of this third courtyard, we have the Holy Relics Department, where some of the Christian and Muslim relics are on exhibit. The fourth and the final courtyard is the Topkapi waterfront, overlooking the Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, and the Sea of Marmara, is where there is a beautiful restaurant with this lovely view, and Istanbul is never complete unless you have this wonderful view in front of this restaurant. Also in the first courtyard of Topkapi Palace, we have Saint Irene Church, which was never converted into a mosque and was used as a church until it was converted into a museum in the 19th century and was used as the imperial mint. Within the grounds of Topkapi Palace, one of the other museums we have today is the Archaeological Museum. More than 1 million historical artifacts makes this museum the 5th biggest archaeological museum in the world. We have artifacts from the Balkans, Africa, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, the Arabian Peninsula, Afghanistan, and many of the Ottoman Empire states. The column of Constantine the Great was erected on the second hill of Constantinople to mark the event of relocating his capital from Rome to Constantinople in 330 AD. He placed his statue on top, and today it's shorter than the original, and the porphyry pieces are strapped, securing the column by iron bands against the earthquakes. Underneath this column lies the burial grounds for the family of Constantine, and there's especially a small room housing the holy relics belonging to Jesus and to earlier Christian era, brought here by Helen, the mother of Constantine the Great. Grand Bazaar is one of the oldest markets in the world, dating back to 1461, with some 60 streets, over 4,000 shops, a must-see in Istanbul. Handmade carpets, jewelry are some of the best examples of the Turkish art are sold here, with a certificate of authenticity backed by solid guarantees. Silverware, souvenirs, decorative items, ceramics, leather goods, superior quality of Iznik and Kütahya tiles, folkloric costumes and accessories are all sold here. The spice market of Istanbul is located in Eminönü, right next to the new mosque, which was constructed and opened in 1664 by architect Kazım Ağa. A market for herbs and spices, natural medicines, vegetable roots, dried fruits, fish and delicatessens are all sold here. You must try the Turkish delight and coffee. Coffee came from South Yemen at the time of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, and he gave the okay for it to be exported to different parts of the Ottoman Empire. This is how the European coffee culture has its roots going back to the spice market in Istanbul. Istanbul Gar, the Sirkeci train station, was inaugurated on November the 3rd in 1890 and was commissioned and built by Jasmund, a German engineer and architect. It was built by granite and local marble stones. The Orient Express is the oldest and the most luxurious train ride in the world, began its maiden journey in 1883 and concluded it here. Agatha Christie's novel Murder on the Orient Express took place here. Many more celebrities traveled by this train to arrive in Istanbul, such as John Lennon, Winston Churchill, Paul Newman, the Rolling Stones, and Catherine Deneuve. When the Orient Express train service began, lack of quality hotels in Istanbul was the problem. So the Para Palace Hotel was built and opened in 1892 by the Wagonli Company. In the Para Palace Hotel, one can visit the room of Agatha Christie on the 4th floor in room 411. The Mosque of Süleyman the Magnificent is located on the 3rd hill, and it is an architectural masterpiece and was built between 1550 and 1557 by Sinan the architect. It has 4 minarets with 10 balconies, signifying Süleyman the Magnificent as the 10th Ottoman Sultan from the beginning and the 4th one to have ruled after the conquest of Constantinople in Istanbul. The minarets are 74 meters tall, and there is a rectangular fountain in the center of a courtyard of this main building, which is almost a square, like 57 meters by 60 meters. The diameter of the dome is 25 meters, and its height is 53 meters. The main dome is carried by 4 elephant feet pillars, and it's supported by 4 huge vaults. The white marble is from the island of Marmara, and the green marble came from the Arabian Peninsula. The perfect acoustic system enables the voice of the imam to be heard from everywhere. Within the complex, outside of the mosque, we have a hospital, a place to look after the poor people by providing food to them, and most of the tombs in the area belong to the family of Suleiman the Magnificent and his close relatives, such as his famous wife Roxalana, as well as Sinan the architect, are buried in this area. Most earlier palaces of Constantinople were constructed in the city center around the hippodrome. However, from the 8th century onwards, palaces such as the Black Hernea or Tekfur Palace were built by the city walls and was used until the city was conquered by the Ottoman Turks. The three-storied, colorful facade is decorated with brick and stone workmanship and was built in the 12th century with a small courtyard adjacent to the city walls. One of the major reasons why the city of Constantinople was a very hard city to conquer was based on the fact that it had the very strong city walls going around it. 22 kilometers long on this triangular format, the city of Constantinople had the final walls by 413 AD at the time of Theodosius II. It's approximately 6 kilometers long between the Marble Tower and the Golden Horn on the land side, while the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara sections form the triangle. With some 16 major gates, it's a three-level defense system: the exterior wall, the moat, and the interior wall. UNESCO sponsored the restoration of the walls of Constantinople since 1980. The Kariye Museum was once upon a time the Church of Kora and was then converted into a mosque. But the original church goes back to the 6th century AD. The second church was built in the 11th century AD. The third church was built in the 12th century AD. And the final one was completed by the 14th century, by 1321, at the time of Theodore Metochites, who is presenting a model of the church to Jesus Christ seated above the entrance gate. He is wearing an interesting turban, who was the Grand Legate of Constantinople at the time. The main church has no mosaics inside the dome because of earthquakes, and it was converted into a mosque, so a little mihrab can be noticed in the front. One of the most interesting scenes inside is the Last Judgment with Jesus Christ, Virgin Mary, the six fathers of the church underneath the fresco of Anastasis is interesting, along with Jesus Christ welcoming those into the church with the three fingers open, and the exonarthex has scenes from the life of Jesus Christ, while in the indonarthex we have scenes from the life of Virgin Mary. The mosaics are some of the finest works in the world, and indeed the finest Renaissance mosaics are in this Church of Kora. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the gems of Istanbul is this little Church of Kora, today located in the Edirne district, is welcoming those into the church. IC and XC Kora Tonzon Ton, as one can notice it above the entrance gate. Virgin Mary is passing away with Peter and Paul on both sides. The burning of the rich man in hell and the bringing of life of Adam and Eve by Jesus Christ are some of those most wonderful scenes. Eyüp Mosque, and in the nearby hills, the Pierre Loti Hill, is one of the most sacred places of worship within the Islamic world. Eyüp al-Ansari was the flag bearer of Prophet Muhammad, and he died here during the Arabic siege of Constantinople in the 7th century AD. His grave was discovered in 1453 during the siege of Constantinople, and a mosque was built by then to commemorate his burial. The earlier mosque was demolished by an earthquake, which was replaced by the present one in the 18th century. The mosque is surrounded by cemeteries, and on the hill lies the Pierre Loti Cafe. A French poet, writer, a lover of Istanbul, came here for the best view of the Golden Horn and wrote his memoir on top of the hill overlooking the Mosque of Eyüp. The Golden Horn is a naturally safe and protected harbor and has given throughout history a tremendous help to the development of the town of Istanbul. It divides the European section into two parts. It's approximately 8 kilometers long, and its name comes from the word of fertility, and it's naturally shaped like a horn. The Byzantine had a chain that was placed in between the two sections of the Golden Horn, preventing the enemy ships from entrance into the harbor. Today we have 3 bridges across the Golden Horn that separates the two sections of the European Istanbul as the old and the new cities. The region Balat, the word coming from Palation meaning palace, is an area where we have numerous Greek churches. Near the Blachernaia Palace, the importance was understood when the Sephardic Jews settled here, escaping the Spanish Inquisition by the end of the 15th century. In the region we see typical Jewish buildings, mostly 3 stories, with second and third floor prostrations like balconies, and Mehmet II gave the freedom of faith to non-Muslims by his Emanname. Bayezid II brought the Jewish people, starting in 1492, into Istanbul, and most of them settled along the Golden Horn. The highest ranking priest of the Orthodox Church is called the Patriarch, and the patriarchal building has been here since 1601 and is known as the Hagios Yorgos Church, known as the Monastery of St. George in the Fanar district. The activities of his community is conducted from here. According to the Greek Orthodox sect, the bodies of the 3 saint nuns, Theophano, Euphemia, and Omonia, and many other holy relics are on display inside the church. The Bulgarian Patriarchal Church, greenish and gray-colored, was built in 1898 in Neo-Gothic style in Vienna, in cast iron, and has been shipped here using the Danube River, and it was remounted along the Golden Horn and completed in 1898. It's the only cast iron church in the world remaining. Galata Tower is located on the north section of the Golden Horn and owes its name to the Genoese colony which lived here at one time and was completed in 1349. Its observation balcony is 52 meters high, while the tip at the top of the conical cap is at 70 meters. The tower weighs 10,000 tons, and Ahmet Hazarefendi Çelebi, a Turkish aviation pioneer, flew from this tower across the Bosphorus to Üsküdar, a distance of 1 3/4 of a mile, in 1636. with a pair of original wings invented by him and was rewarded by the Sultan with a bag of gold. The Princess Islands is one of the major summer resorts of Istanbul and is full of hills covered with pine trees and flowers. It was a place where once the dethroned emperors were exiled. Especially its summer houses and villas are worth seeing. The pine grove with no motor vehicles, and the transportation is done with 230 horse carriages on the 9 islands, is one of the must-see places around Istanbul. Büyükada, the Big Island, is where the Greek Orthodox Church, called Ayayorgi, St. George's, is located at the highest hill. The name of the church is derived from the patron saint of Cappadocia, St. George, who was martyred by pagans in the 3rd century AD. Every year, on the 23rd of April, the day of Ayayorgi Memorial, as well as the 24th of September, the 40th day of the Virgin Mary's death, thousands of visitors from all faiths come for the celebrations. Taksim Square is the most famous square in Istanbul. The word meaning of Taksim is partition, because this was the center for distributing the water to the Beyoğlu district. The ceremonial monument in the middle of the square is a common meeting point. The Republic Monument is 11 meters high and was erected by the Italian sculptor Pietro Canonica in 1928. One side represents the Republic of Turkey, while the other side represents the National War of Independence of Turkey. Surroundings of Taksim is inhabited by non-Muslims and represents the cultural and shopping center of the city. Along the most crowded pedestrian avenue of Istanbul, the Istiklal Street, meaning Independence, lies many shops, cinemas, exhibition halls, theater halls, art workshops, discos, and cafes. Several countries' consular buildings are here. Along the Nevizade Street, with the Flower Passage, Fisherman's Street, and the nostalgic tram operating between the tunnel and Taksim, forms a very colorful, moving, and a 24-hour busy street in town. The tunnel is the world's second oldest underground transportation system and was constructed by a Frenchman in 1874 and is 573 meters long. The Bosphorus is a water channel that connects the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara and separates the European and Asian continents of Istanbul. In 2001, the American underwater archaeologist Ballard identified that Bosphorus was a dry riverbed some 7,500 years ago. But then, at the time of the Noah's flood, the water level rose up and the Sea of Marmara was connected to the Black Sea. We have two different currents. The surface current runs from the Black Sea towards the Sea of Marmara, whereas the bottom current runs in the opposite direction. The length of the Bosphorus is 31 kilometers, and the widest point is 3.5 kilometers wide. The narrowest point is 760 meters wide. The deepest point is 120 meters. The Bosphorus Bridge was commissioned on the 29th of October 1973, on the 50th anniversary of Turkish Republic, measuring 1,074 meters long and was the first Bosphorus Bridge. The second one is called the Fatih Sultan Mehmet Bridge, was finished in 1988 and is 1,090 meters long. On both sides of the Bosphorus, there are numerous Ottoman winter and summer palaces, mansions, villas, and historical kiosks. The Dolmabahce Palace was completed in 1856 and was commissioned by Sultan Abdülmecit and was built by the Balyan brothers and covers an area of 110,000 square meters. Between 1910 and 1912, central heating and electrical systems were installed. It has 285 rooms, 46 halls, 6 bathrooms, 68 toilets within the palace. The ceremonial hall is the most superb hall within the palace. It covers an area of 2,000 square meters with 56 columns. Each one is 36 meters high, and the 4.5-ton Irish crystal chandelier hangs from the dome, one of the largest ever made. This was a gift given by Queen Victoria in 1856. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern Turkey, spent his last months in this palace and died here on the 10th of November 1938 at 9:05 a.m. The Çırağan Palace was completed in 1874 as a summer residence at the time of Sultan Abdülaziz. It is now the Deluxe Kempinski Hotel. Over the hillside is located the Yıldız Şale Kiosk, which was finished in 1880 at the time of Sultan Abdülhamit II. The Şale Kiosk, an Austrian Alpine-style imperial residence in downtown Istanbul today, was used by the guests of the Ottoman Sultan and later the Turkish presidents. In 1889 and later in 1898, it hosted the famous German Kaiser Wilhelm II. Going through the gardens of Şale Kiosk, we can notice from the exterior the beauty of a chalet-style kiosk here in Istanbul. Inside, we have the Yellow Hall, where porcelain heaters are used from Sweden to heat the palace. In the oval chamber of the Ottoman Sultan is where Kaiser Wilhelm II slept. You are now seeing his special bed, which later on was used by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk as well. Over the walls, you can see 2 beautiful paintings by Zonaro, the palace artist from Italy. On the floor, you can see the most beautiful hereke carpets of the 19th century. Going to the side rooms, we can see the rooms where the state guests have stayed. Iranian Shah Reza Pahlavi, Pakistani President Mirza, Tunisian President Bourguiba, Saudi Arabian King Faisal, Russian Premier Kosygin, Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, and the French President Charles de Gaulle are some of the dignitaries that stayed in this palace. Finally, going into the biggest salon of the Yıldız Şale Kiosk, which measures 29 meters by 14. Looking around, we can see the whole floor space being carpeted with a one-piece hereke carpet that fits to a total square meters of 406. This is the largest hereke carpet ever produced in the world. Hereke is about 60 kilometers away from Istanbul, a small town which in the 19th century became world famous with the imperial looms where Turkish carpets were produced. Some of the finest carpets the Turks ever produced have come out of these looms. Kaiser Wilhelm II especially was a carpet lover, for he used to come to watch the girls making these carpets in hereke. During those 2 times he spent in Istanbul, he slept in the oval chamber. The biggest carpet you are looking at is with the 3 large medallions symbolizing eternal happiness. It's a carpet which is on a beige background, ivory colors and red colors have been used, and it is under the most beautiful ceiling in the whole palace. which is most highly decorative, and they had to wreck one wall of the palace in order to bring this huge carpet into the room. Otherwise, it did not quite fit through the door space. So then they had to rebuild the wall at the far end, which is 8.5 meters high, with the two capitals carrying the wall. After this lovely carpeted salon of Yıldız Şale Kiosk, we continue our trip on the Bosphorus. Along the Bosphorus, one of the most colorful districts is called Ortaköy, meaning Midtown, where you can find a mosque, synagogue, church, all side by side within the same single neighborhood. Abdülmecit's architect Balyan finished the mosque of Ortaköy in 1867. It's in the Baroque style, and especially on Sundays, the handicrafts bazaar and the open-air cafes, where one can find baked potatoes and fast food restaurants, is one of the very popular destinations for the weekenders in Istanbul. The Rumeli Hisar Fortress was built on the European side in 1452, opposite from the Anatolian fortress, in order to stop the aid coming into Constantinople, and it took them 4 months to build it. Along the Bosphorus, sometimes you can see yachts like the Savarona, which was used by Atatürk, and we have beautiful areas like Bebek, meaning the baby, the most expensive part of Istanbul. The Beylerbeyi Palace, underneath the first bridge, was built between 1861 and 65 at the time of Sultan Abdülaziz by the architect Serkis Balyan, with 26 rooms, 6 salons, 6 bathrooms. Turkish and Western architectural elements were used. Sultan's love of the sea has led them to decorate the ceiling with sea and ship paintings. The hall with the round indoor pool, spiral staircases, crystal chandeliers is part of the beauty of this palace. The highest hilltop in Istanbul is on the Asian side. It's called the Çamlıca Hill. At 268 meters above the sea level, with beautiful cypress trees, is where you have the most beautiful panoramic view of Istanbul. The Leanders Tower, on the other hand, alongside of Üsküdar, is going back to the days of the Byzantine emperors. The legend tells us that the emperor had this tower built for the daughter, and she was eventually bitten by a snake. To some people, this is related with the Leanders Tower, which in fact is not very true, because Leander crossed the Dardanelles and not the Bosphorus. This is why the tower is called the Maiden's Tower, but in fact the history tells us that by 500 BC, where today we have the Maiden's Tower, was a place where they collected taxes from all the ships passing up and down the Bosphorus, a tall collection tower. However, recently, one of the James Bond movies, The World Is Not Enough, was finalized where this tower is today. So, ladies and gentlemen, last stop today is in front of the old church of St. Polyoptos, which was built here in the 6th century AD by one of the famous family members in the 6th century AD. Her name was Anicia Juliana, an empress at the time of Justinian and Theodora. She built here a church named after the local saints, St. Polyoptos, and the church was here in size a little larger than the Mosque of Suleiman the Magnificent, smaller than the Church of St. Sophia. As a church, it existed here till the Latin occupation of Constantinople. It was built in the 6th century AD. By 527 AD was completed and was known to be destroyed at the time of the Fourth Crusades in the 13th century AD. When the Fourth Latin Crusade came here in 1204, the church was intact. In fact, one of the pieces of the marble works from this very church recently was discovered in St. Mark's Square in Venice. It's known as the statue of the four tetrarchs, the four sons of Constantine the Great, made of porphyry column and piece of marble, was taken from here to St. Mark's at the time of the Fourth Crusades. So this church was a very large church in size, and Annikia Juliana had her palace on the other side, which we will introduce to you very soon, where we have today the municipality building of Istanbul, as they discovered floor mosaics going back to the 6th century AD. It was discovered during the excavation of this municipality hall in the 1950s. Today, the church facing east, the direction where we stand today, is in need of some restoration. But lucky we are, we have a Saint Sophia built from the same time, intact today. Annikia Juliana, in a way, was a rival of Empress Theodora, and that's one of the reasons why she wanted to surpass the size of the building which Juliana Annikia had built. Justinian wanted a larger church to be built, surpassing the size of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. At the same time, Theodora wanted to surpass the building of Annikia Juliana. And so today's St. Sophia Church, which then was a mosque and is a museum in our times, surpassed the size of the remains of the church where we stand today. So now we move our scene from the place of the church across the street. In the distance we can see the Sea of Marmara, as well as the municipality hall, which was excavated in the 1950s and finished in time. And as we zoom around, we come to the Mosque of the Prince, the Shehzade Mosque, one of the works of Sinan, the master architect, where he started as an architect at the age of 50, completed in 1548, and then built right next to it is the famous aqueduct of Emperor Valens, a fantastic 4th century AD remains of Constantinople as part of the water transportation system of the town of Constantinople, under which the traffic moves today, connecting the 3rd and the 4th hills of the town of Constantinople. On the 3rd hill we have the Mosque of Suleiman the Magnificent, whereas on the 4th hill we have the Mosque of Fatih today, under which of the holy apostles existed, where they found a lot of the burials of the Byzantine emperors. And finally, we come back to this very special day where you see Mustafa Kemal Atatürk on the municipality on the 86th year anniversary of the republic that he had founded back in 1923. A very jubilant day in Istanbul is coming to an end with your introduction to the most beautiful town the way I see it. Thank you for a wonderful audience.